Good evening, students. Welcome to yet another online class on educational planning. So I'm sorry that the class is coming a little bit late. That is as a result of the total lockdown in Rivers State. I know today everybody had to go and look for what his family will eat to restock the house. So I was engaged from morning till this evening. So I only have time this evening to send your class. So today we shall be examining the politics and educational planning. We shall be examining politics and educational planning. Politics and education are like marriage partners. Politics and education are like marriage partners. However, the two are also like two strange bedfellows. The two of them first are like marriage partners. Secondly, the two are like strange bedfellows. So what makes them marriage partners and what makes them strange bedfellows is the first part of our visit. The two are supposed to be marriage partners. It means they are supposed to be like husband and wife. But at the same time, we are also informed that the two appear to be like strange bedfellows. So what makes them to appear in that form is what we shall first of all discuss before we go to the nitty-gritty of politics and educational planning. So what makes politics to be seen as strange bedfellow to educational planning or to education? Now, the game of politics is perceived by some persons as negative. Now, when you perceive the game of politics as being negative, then you see it from the perception of its evil effects. Its evil effects. So along that line, most people see politics as a dirty game. Most people see politics as corrupt practice. Most people see politics as a game of deception. Most people see politics as a public enemy. And most people also see politics as an unhealthy rivalry. Now, people who see politics along this line see politics to be a strange bedfellow to education. Education is supposed to instill in the individual knowledge and skills that will enable him to function effectively in society. And education is seen as an instrument that can be used to effect national development. If that is the truth, how can you now link that same education to a dirty game, to corrupt practices, to something that's an enemy to the public, and then to game of deception? Education cannot be used as a game of deception. Education cannot be used for unhealthy rivalry. Rather, education can bring unity, can instill discipline, can instill knowledge in the individual that acquires it. So you see, when you look at it from this angle, then how then can politics and education come together? It becomes difficult. That is, if we look at politics from this angle, then there won't be any relationship between politics and education. That's on the negative perception of politics. Then when we look at the positive perception of politics, some people view politics as from the angle of authoritative allocation of resources through power and authority. Politics is seen from the positive perspective to include the act of organizing a state, the act of social restructuring of a state, the act of making good decisions, the act of making good rules, the act of resolution of conflicts and allocation of resources, the act of management of public life, a means through which the ideal state could be realized, the real sense of it. Politics is an instrument for creating a more organized and peaceful society through the use of power and authority. So these are the positive aspects of what politics does. So most people see politics from this angle. Now, when you see politics from the East positive angle, then you will agree that there is a strong relationship between politics and education. Because for politics to be able to achieve social restructuring, to be able to make good decisions, to be able to make good rules, to be able to resolve conflicts, to be able to allocate resources, to be able to manage public life, to be able to serve as a means for an ideal state, and then for it to be an instrument for creating more organized and peaceful society, then education have a role to play here. That is where the link comes. That is where the relationship is established. When you look at politics from this positive angle, then you will agree that there is a strong link between education and politics. So, having said that, so let's examine quickly what education does. From the angle of education, what does education does that politics need, that brings them together as marriage partners instead of two strange bedfellows? What is it that education does that enables politics to need it in its gameplay? From this perspective, education is seen as a public good, a social service, and an instrument for the perpetuation of social values, norms, and economic development, as well as manpower development. Let me take that again. From the angle of education, education is seen as a public good, a social service, an instrument for the perpetuation of social values, norms, and economic development, as well as manpower development. Education plays this role for society. And if education plays this role for society, then politics must rely on education for its own role. So this role of education brings them together as husband and wife in societal development. So for this reason, educational planning is therefore central to politics. Educational planning is therefore central to politics. Hence, politics cannot allow education to be on its own, cannot give education chances. When we understand this role of education and the role that politics play in society, then you will see that politics will always have education as a marriage partner. Please, I need you. We should be husband and wife so that we will partner with each other for us to achieve these goals, and so that education can also achieve its own goal. So it is for this reason that education therefore can be said to begin with politics, operate in politics, and end in politics. The political gameplay that revolves around what education does is what makes politics to be a part, what makes education to be a part of politics. Hence, it is popularly said that education begins with politics, operates in politics, and ends in politics. As we progress, we shall see how education begins with politics, how it operates through politics, and how it ends in politics. It's a nice discourse. Now, having said this, then you will now see that from the angle of politics, from the political angle, politics is used to influence and control the planning of education along the line of what education intends to achieve for society. Politics is used to plan education along that lenses of what education does for society. Education is seen as a public good, is seen as a social service, is seen as an instrument for the perpetuation of social values, norms, and economic development. It is politics that directs education along this line. It is through the political instrument that influences education to go along this line. So politics gives education the direction it should go. It determines the volume of education that should be given out. It determines the nature of education to be used to achieve all this outlined role of education. Now, In specific terms, let's therefore look at how politics determines how education is used to achieve these rules. Now, in every society, there is what is called the educational ideology of that society. That ideology have meaning on the approach that a society uses in its educational system. The approach adopted by a society is determined by the political structure, is determined by politics. What are those approaches that a country can adopt to effect its education system? Such approaches include: 1. The consumption or economic approach to educational planning. The consumption or economic approach to educational planning. 2. The manpower approach to educational planning. 3. The social demand approach to educational planning. 4. The synthetic approach to educational planning. And then 5. Above all this, the educational goals and objectives. All these things I've listed here are determined by politics, are determined by the political gameplay. A lot of politics is involved for a country to determine whether the approach to be adopted in its educational planning should be the consumption or economic approach. What that means is, before a society adopts any system of education, before a society decides on the education to be provided, should it first of all look at the economic benefit that a society should derive from such type of education? That is determined by politics. Should the type of politics, the type of education to be provided in a country be determined by the manpower supply? Should we tie our education to the manpower we need in society? Is determined by politics. Should education be provided as a social service for everybody to benefit from? Is determined by politics. Should we combine these approaches? Should we combine all these approaches and provide them in the society? Is determined by politics. Above all, the goals and objectives to be pursued using education is also determined by politics. So you can see that is why it is said that education begins with politics, because it is at that beginning that politics determines the nature and type of education. The approaches to be adopted in educational planning is determined by politics. So that's why I say it begins with politics. Let us now see how it operates through politics. Now it is the political dynamics. It is the political dynamics that is also used to determine how these things should be planned. Now, in a country, for example, from the angle of the constitution, education is included in the constitution. The ability of education to be included in the constitution is determined by the political class or through politics. In Nigeria, at the onset, before independence, education was provided as in the constitution as under the residual list. Under the residual list. But after independence, through politics, education was now reverted and included in the concurrent list. By the concurrent list, it means that both the region and the federal will legislate on educational matters. All that became possible through politics. It is also through politics that education was included in the laws of society. What we now have as codes, edicts, ordinances, and the decrees in all regimes of government. It is the political interplay that determines the type of edict, the type of ordinances, the type of education law, the type of decrees that are formulated that reflects educational practices. All these are determined by politics. Whether it is a military regime or it's a civilian regime, all the interplay that takes place before decisions are taken concerning education, whether as a law, whether as an edict, whether as a decree, whether as a code, or whether as an ordinance. All of them are political forces that determines all that. So you can see that without all this interplay, political interplay, education will not have meaning, or it will not even have been appear in the law. So for the law to recognize education, it is political interplay that does that. Now, apart from this, the educational policies, educational goals, and educational objectives are also in the hands of politicians. It's determined through politics. So what should constitute the goals? What should constitute the objective? What should be the nature and philosophy of education is determined by politics. So you can see how through politics education is achieved. It begins with politics, operates through politics, and ends in politics. All right. So let's see how politics really determines educational planning. Let's examine how the political forces really determines educational planning. Now, because of the role of education in improving the capacity of the individual and for national development, this has continued to generate controversies. This has continued to generate controversies among politicians on the nature of education to be provided. Now, the role that education plays for the individual and for national development has made it possible for it not to be allowed to grow on its own, and therefore political forces determines the direction that education should go. And how does the political forces achieve that? So education on its own cannot in any way direct where to go or direct what to do. It is rather an instrument in the hand of politicians. So it is the political class or politics that invariably determines how education should be planned and provided as a social service. It is politics that determines how education should be planned and provided as a social service. 2, it is through politics that determines whether the basis of planning education is it to be based on positive economics or to be determined by market forces. 3, should the nature and the level of government involvement in education, what should be the nature and level of involvement of government in educational provision? 4, what is the stake of society in education? So all these questions raised here are determined by politics, not education itself. Let's see one by one how politics determines all this, how politics determines educational planning along this line. Should education be planned and provided as a social service? It is politics that determines that. It is politics that determines whether education should be provided to the entire citizens as their right. And if it is so, then it is through politics that determines whether education should be free and compulsory or it should be paid for. So you can understand this better when you examine the UBE program in Nigeria. The UBE program in Nigeria is the policy of the politicians that education from at the basic level should be provided free, that every child born in Nigeria that is of school age should be able to attend school free. It's politics that determines that. Politics can as well come tomorrow and remove that clause, and then it changes again. So you can see education operates through politics. It is only through the lenses of politics that you can understand education well. 2, should it be determined on the basis of positive economics or left to the vagaries of imperfect market? Now, what this means here is should we provide education based on the economic returns or economic benefits the society is likely to derive from the various types of education? If that is the case, what this means here is, at the primary school level, what is the economic benefit that a nation should derive from primary education? What is the economic benefit that a nation should derive from secondary education? And what is the benefit that a nation is likely to derive from secondary education? So when we now calculate the likely benefits, the likely economic benefit that a society should derive from any level and type of education, then that will inform our decision to decide on whether to provide that level and type of education or not. All that is determined by politics. Education on its own cannot take decision on that. And those that are involved in educational provision cannot take that decision. It is the political class. It is politics that determines that. Alright, then number 4 now. What should be the nature and level of government involvement in the planning and administration of education? All this is determined by politics. The level of government involvement in education, the level of the various agencies involvement in education, the level of the individual, the household, and parastatals, their level of involvement in education is determined by politics. That is why the overall policy guiding educational system of every country is determined through politics. So unless you understand it from this angle, before you will be able to know that the politics cannot be separated from education. So if you really want to control education, you must be involved in politics. If you really want to direct educational activities, you must be involved in politics. Alright. So all this place education deep into the dynamics of politics. All this I have explained here places education into the deep dynamics of politics. So you can't separate politics from education. So except we understand it from this angle, then it will be difficult for us to think that education can be planned on its own. So when you begin to call yourself educational planners, you have limits. You must understand how education can be planned from the premise of the politics, from the lenses of politics, so that you're able to plan it well. It is the politics that gives direction to educational planning. Alright, now let us also examine again educational planning and the politics of national development. That's another angle where politics comes in. Educational planning and the politics of national development. Education across country is seen as an instrument for national development. Along this line, education develops the manpower that is needed in the various sectors of national economic life. Education is needed to develop manpower in agricultural sector, to develop manpower for mines and industry, to develop manpower even for education, to develop manpower that will be used in politics, to develop manpower in think of any sector, and then you think of education providing the knowledge that is needed in that area, for that area to develop. So education plays significant role in national development. However, even though education plays this role, it is through politics that determines the extent to which education can be used to achieve this. It is through politics that the extent to which education is used to achieve development is determined. Now, the area the politicians lay emphasis on will determine the extent to which that area will be developed. Let me expatiate this a little bit. Now, you are aware that in Nigeria lacks manpower in certain areas, which makes the Nigerian government to bring in foreign investors in those areas. For example, Nigeria is building railway across the country. Those railways being developed by Nigeria, we are using the manpower from China to develop them. While in Nigeria, we can as well develop manpower that can develop that railway. We can develop manpower in science and technology. We can develop manpower in the health sector. But Nigeria keep relying on foreign nationals in this area. What it means is that the politicians in this country have not considered manpower development along that line for national development. If they do, they will invest in manpower development in the various universities, and within a couple of years, we'll have our own manpower along these lines. So you see, the achievement of national development using education is determined by politics. When they pay emphasis now on educational development, we will develop the necessary manpower that develop the national economy. So you see that there's a strong link between education and politics here. Politics determines the level of manpower that a society will develop. Now that they have not paid any emphasis along that side, it is those people who are in the education system, are they able to? The university system, what are they doing? They are not achieving any result because the politicians have not been able to empower them. Any day they do that, then we will achieve results. We have not been able to build our own cars. We have not been able to build our own roads. We have not been able to build anything called made in Nigeria. We depend on outsiders because the politicians have not been able to properly empower education along that line. Now, let's also examine another area of politics and education, that the politics of educational funding. Politics of educational funding. Fund allocated to education comes in the form of recurrent costs, capital costs, and overhead costs. Fund that we use in education, we use fund in education for recurrent costs. Recurrent cost is for payment of salaries and running costs. Then we have capital cost. Capital cost is the money used in infrastructural development in the education sector. All right. Then overhead costs, money spent on the support services and all that, and other expenses incurred in education. All these are provided through politics. It is politics that determines how education is funded. If the political class does not allocate fund to education, there's nothing you can do. The political class can decide to hold teachers for 3 months. There's nothing anybody can do. We are aware of states where salaries are owed. We are aware of the decay in infrastructure. We are aware of poor funding of education. If the same class can decide tomorrow to increase funding of education, and it will move ahead. So you can see that education ends up in politics. Education begins, operates through, and ends in politics. There's nothing education can do without politics coming into it. So this gives you a clear understanding of the relationship between education and politics. That investment in education also competes with investment in other sectors of the economy. For example, security. If you examine how much the politicians allocate to security, you discover that what they allocate to security is higher than what they allocate to education. If you check what they allocate to other sectors outside security, you discover that other sectors have something higher than education. All that is why is because the political class have priority for those areas than education. At most, what has been allocated to education over the years is between 10 to 11% of the budgetary allocations, national budget, between 10 and 11% of the budgetary allocations. But the UNESCO had prescribed 26% of budgetary allocation to be allocated to education. But the politicians have always allocated between 9 and 10 as highest. 11 and 10 and 11% as highest allocation to education in Nigeria. So you see, they have the yam and they have the knife, and they determine where to cut it. So politics gives direction and determines the nature, the type of education that a country should have. Not just that, they determine how it should be provided. So from this explanation, you can now understand the linked relationship between politics and education. Even though education is used as an instrument for national development, even though education is used as a public good, even though education is used to inculcate values, to transmit culture, for perpetuation of society. Even though education is used as an instrument for all this, it is the politics that determines the extent to which education can achieve all this. My dear students, that is the end of this class. We have been able to establish that politics and education can be seen as marriage partners. They can be seen to have a strong link. But however, education is seen to operate, is seen to begin with politics, operates through politics, and ends in politics. Thank you very much for listening. God bless you. I'll see you again next week.